Chancellor Palpatine has just granted Anakin Skywalker a seat on the Jedi Council. The young Jedi stands before the most powerful leaders of his order, feeling their reluctance, their distrust. In our timeline, Anakin accepts this appointment despite not being granted the rank of master, setting him on a path of resentment and anger that would ultimately lead to his fall to the dark side. But what if, in that crucial moment, Anakin made a different choice? What if he declined the seat entirely? This single decision would reshape the entire Star Wars saga in ways we could never imagine. Today, we're going to explore not just the immediate consequences, but dive deep into the psychological, political, and cosmic ramifications of this one moment of humility. We'll examine multiple timeline branches, analyze every major character's response, and trace the ripple effects across decades of galactic history. Let's rewind to that pivotal scene in Revenge of the Sith. Chancellor Palpatine has just informed Anakin of his appointment to the Council, calling it an unprecedented honor. The scene takes place in Palpatine's office, with its sweeping views of Coruscant's skyline. Anakin's face shows confusion and uncertainty. He knows something feels wrong about this situation. His connection to the Force, while clouded by his emotional turmoil, still whispers warnings about the path he's being led down. In the original timeline, he accepts reluctantly, already feeling the weight of being used as a political pawn. But imagine if instead, he took a step back, closed his eyes for a moment to center himself in the Force, and then looked directly at Palpatine with newfound clarity. Chancellor, I'm deeply honored by your confidence in me, but I don't feel ready for such a responsibility. The Jedi Council should choose its own members based on merit, wisdom, and the will of the Force, not political appointments. I believe my path lies in continued learning and service as a knight. The silence that would follow this statement would be deafening. Palpatine, master manipulator that he is, would quickly mask his shock and fury behind his practiced political smile. But for just a split second, his true nature would flicker across his face. This was not part of the plan. For over a decade, he had been carefully grooming Anakin, positioning every piece on the board with surgical precision. The boy was supposed to be his greatest weapon, his inside source, his eventual apprentice. And now, with one act of unexpected wisdom, Anakin was threatening to unravel decades of meticulous planning. Palpatine's mind would race through possibilities. He might try to convince Anakin otherwise, his voice taking on that familiar grandfatherly tone. But Anakin, think of all the good you could do, the influence you could have. The Republic needs strong voices on the Council, voices that understand the reality of this war. He might even hint at darker purposes. There are things happening in this war, secret things, that only someone in your position could help address. But if Anakin remained firm in his decision, drawing strength from the rightness of his choice, Palpatine would be forced to accept it while his mind frantically recalculated his entire strategy. The Chancellor would reassure Anakin that he respected his decision, perhaps even praise his wisdom, all while internally seething at this unexpected development. The psychological impact on Palpatine cannot be overstated. This man had spent his entire adult life believing in his own intellectual superiority, his ability to predict and control every variable. He had convinced himself that he understood Anakin Skywalker better than Anakin understood himself. This moment of defiance would be more than just a tactical setback. It would be a fundamental challenge to Palpatine's self-image as the master puppeteer. The immediate aftermath of this decision would ripple through the Jedi Temple like a force wave. When Anakin arrives to inform the Council of his choice, he would find them in emergency session, still processing the unprecedented nature of the Chancellor's political maneuvering. The great circular chamber, with its tall windows letting in Coruscant's eternal twilight, would fall silent as Anakin entered. Master Windu would be the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled but his surprise evident. "Young Skywalker, we understand the Chancellor has appointed you to this council." The statement would hang in the air like an accusation, not directed at Anakin, but at the political forces trying to interfere with Jedi autonomy. Anakin would step forward, his posture more confident than they had ever seen it, his presence in the Force calmer and more centered. "Masters, I have declined the Chancellor's appointment. I believe the Council should choose its own members, and I don't feel I have the wisdom or experience necessary for such a role. I ask only to continue serving the Order as a knight, learning from all of you." The council members would exchange glances, each processing this unexpected development through their own perspective. Mace Windu, who had been prepared for a confrontation, would find himself genuinely impressed. This showed more wisdom and humility than he had ever seen from the young Skywalker. Perhaps they had underestimated him. Perhaps there was hope for his development after all. Yoda would sense the shift in Anakin immediately through the Force. The burden of resentment, the growing darkness that had been clouding the young Jedi's presence, would begin to lift like fog before the morning sun. The ancient Jedi Master would close his eyes, extending his senses, and feel something he hadn't felt from Anakin in years. Peace. True, inner peace. "Wise, this decision is," Yoda would say, his voice carrying approval that Anakin had rarely heard directed at him. "Ready for the Council, perhaps you are not. But ready for growth, yes. Ready for learning, you are." Ki-Adi-Mundi would lean forward, his elongated head tilted in consideration. "This shows remarkable maturity, young Skywalker. The Council is not a prize to be won or a position to be granted by politicians. It is a responsibility that must be earned through years of service and wisdom." Plo Koon, his voice filtered through his breathing apparatus, would add his own perspective. "In declining power when it was offered freely, you demonstrate that you might one day be worthy of it. This is the Jedi way." Even Shakti would nod, approvingly, her leku swaying gently. The Force works in mysterious ways. Perhaps this seeming setback is actually the first step toward your true destiny. But the most significant reaction would come from Obi-Wan Kenobi. When he learned of Anakin's decision, either through official channels or through his former Padawan's direct communication, he would feel a wave of emotions: relief, pride, hope, and something he hadn't felt about Anakin in years: trust. Constant worry that had been eating at him, the sense that he was losing his former apprentice to forces beyond his control, would suddenly ease. Obi-Wan would seek out Anakin immediately, finding him perhaps in the temple's meditation gardens, sitting quietly among the softly glowing plants that flourished in the carefully controlled environment. "Anakin," he would say, settling beside his former Padawan on one of the stone benches, "I heard about your decision regarding the council seat." Anakin would look up, perhaps expecting criticism or questions about his political judgment. Instead, he would see something in Obi-Wan's eyes that he hadn't seen in too long: unqualified approval. "I hope I did the right thing, Master. It just felt wrong, like I was being used." "Your instincts serve you well," Obi-Wan would reply, placing a hand on Anakin's shoulder. "The Force was guiding you, even if you didn't fully realize it at the time. This decision shows more wisdom than accepting a dozen council seats could have." This conversation would mark the beginning of a renewed relationship between master and student. Without the political pressures and resentments that had been driving them apart, they could return to their natural dynamic of mutual respect and affection. Obi-Wan would see this as an opportunity to address some of the underlying issues that had been troubling Anakin, while Anakin would feel more open to guidance without the defensive walls he had been building. The impact on Anakin's personal life would be equally profound. When he returned to his secret apartment to tell Padme about his decision, he would find her in their living area, reviewing Senate documents as she often did in the evenings. The soft lighting of their private space, so different from the formal chambers of politics and Jedi business, would seem to embrace him as he entered. "Padme," he would say, and she would immediately hear something different in his voice. A lightness that had been absent for months. When he explained his choice, her reaction would be immediate and visceral. She would set aside her documents and cross to him, taking his hands in hers. "Oh, Anakin," she would whisper, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you. I've been so worried about what all this political maneuvering was doing to you, to us." This shows the man I fell in love with, the man who always tries to do what's right, not what's easy or advantageous. Their relationship, which had been strained by secrecy, political pressures, and Anakin's growing darkness, would begin to heal from this moment. Without the constant stress of his council obligations and the resentment they generated, Anakin would be more present in their marriage, more able to support Padme in her own political struggles. This would be especially important as Padme's pregnancy progressed. In the original timeline, Anakin's increasing instability and his visions of her death had created a spiral. This could lead to several different timeline branches, each with its own dramatic implications for the galaxy. Let's explore the first major possibility. Anakin discovers Palpatine's true identity as a Sith Lord much earlier than in the original timeline. In this scenario, Palpatine's more aggressive and desperate tactics would leave clues that a calmer, more centered Anakin would be better equipped to notice. Perhaps during one of their regular conversations, the Chancellor would let slip some knowledge he shouldn't have, or make a suggestion that could only come from someone with deep understanding of the dark side. Picture this scene. Anakin sits in Palpatine's office, as he has dozens of times before, but this time, something feels different. The Chancellor is discussing the war, mentioning strategic details that weren't in any briefing Anakin attended. When Anakin questions how he knows these things, Palpatine's explanation doesn't quite add up. "The Senate receives many intelligence reports, my boy," Palpatine says. But his eyes don't meet Anakin's, and there's something in his Force presence that sets off alarm bells. Later, as Anakin walks through the temple corridors, these inconsistencies would gnaw at him. In the original timeline, his emotional turmoil would have overwhelmed such subtle warnings. But now, with his mind clear and his connection to the Force stronger, he would be able to process these concerns more rationally. He might begin to research, to ask careful questions, to pay closer attention to patterns he had previously missed. The pieces of the puzzle, Palpatine's rise to power, his convenient emergence during various crises, his unusual knowledge of Jedi affairs, would begin to form a disturbing picture. The moment of realization would be explosive. Perhaps it would come during another private meeting, when Palpatine, frustrated by his inability to corrupt Anakin through traditional means, would finally reveal his true identity in a last-ditch effort at seduction. "Anakin," Palpatine would say, his voice taking on a different quality. "There are things about the Force that the Jedi haven't taught you. Powers that could save those you love, bring peace to the galaxy, end this war. I could teach you these things." And this time, instead of desperate interest, Anakin would feel a chill of recognition. "What are you talking about, Chancellor?" "I am talking about the power of the dark side, young Skywalker. I am Darth Sidious, and I could be your master." In the original timeline, this revelation came at Anakin's lowest point, when he was desperate to save Padme and already deeply corrupted by months of political manipulation. But now, faced with this same revelation while in a healthier mental state, Anakin's response would be entirely different. The shock would be immense. But instead of temptation, he would feel betrayal and anger, righteous anger, the kind that strengthens rather than corrupts. All those years of friendship, of guidance, of paternal care, all revealed as manipulation by the very evil the Jedi had sworn to oppose. Anakin would not strike out in rage, as he might have in the original timeline. Instead, he would center himself in the Force, draw on the teachings that Obi-Wan and Yoda had given him, and respond with the wisdom of a true Jedi. "I trusted you," he would say, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "You were like a father to me. And all this time, you were the enemy we've been fighting." Palpatine, realizing his gambit had failed, might try one last desperate appeal. "Anakin, think of Padme. Your visions of her death, they will come true unless you learn the power to save her. Only through the dark side can you gain such power." But this Anakin, this wiser version who had already chosen humility over power once, would have a different response. "The Force will guide me to save her, if it is meant to be. But I will not betray everything I believe, everyone I love, for the promise of power. You've lost, Palpatine. The Jedi will stop you." The confrontation that would follow would be unlike anything we saw in the original films. Instead of a tortured young man torn between light and dark, Palpatine would face a confident Jedi Knight, backed by the full strength of the light side and the moral certainty of his cause. But Palpatine is not just any Sith Lord. He is one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history. The battle would be fierce, but Anakin would not be fighting alone. His clear thinking would allow him to send a distress signal to the Jedi Temple before the confrontation began, bringing Masters Windu, Yoda, and others to his aid. The arrival of multiple Jedi Masters would completely change the dynamic of the final confrontation. Instead of the desperate, undermanned mission we saw in Revenge of the Sith, this would be a coordinated effort by some of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, led by someone who knew Palpatine's tactics and secrets intimately. Master Windu would arrive first, his purple lightsaber blazing as he burst into the Chancellor's office to find Anakin locked in combat with the revealed Sith Lord. The sight would confirm everything the Jedi had suspected about the political situation, validating their concerns about Palpatine's growing power. "So the mask finally comes off," Windu would say, adding his blade to the fight. The addition of his Vapad technique, which channeled and redirected dark-side energy, would immediately put Palpatine on the defensive. When Yoda arrived, moving with that deceptive speed that belied his ancient age, the battle would effectively be over. Three of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, working in perfect coordination, would be more than even Darth Sidious could handle. The Sith Lord's defeat would be swift and decisive. But the implications of this early victory would ripple through the galaxy in ways both obvious and subtle. Without Palpatine to execute Order 66, the clone troopers' inhibitor chips would never be activated. The Jedi Order would survive, battered by the Clone Wars but fundamentally intact. The immediate aftermath would be chaotic. The revelation that the Republic's Chancellor had been a Sith Lord all along would send shockwaves through the Senate. Emergency sessions would be called, emergency powers would need to be transferred, and the very foundation of the Republic's government would need to be examined and reformed. Padme Amidala would find herself at the center of these political developments. As one of the few senators who had consistently opposed Palpatine's expansion of executive power, she would be well positioned to help guide the Republic through this crisis. Her pregnancy, instead of being a source of fear and secrecy, could become a symbol of hope, new life emerging as the galaxy emerged from the shadow of the Sith. The Clone Wars would end very differently as well. Without Palpatine's influence, the Separatist movement would lose much of its coordination and funding. Count Dooku, if he survived Palpatine's fall, might even be approached about reconciliation. Many of the Separatist grievances were legitimate. Concerns about Republic overreach and corruption. Concerns that Palpatine had been deliberately inflaming for his own purposes. With the real villain exposed and defeated, there might be room for genuine peace negotiations. Anakin, having proven himself in the most dramatic way possible, might even be chosen to serve as a mediator in these talks. His reputation as a war hero, combined with his demonstrated wisdom and moral courage, would make him an ideal candidate for such a role. But let's explore a second timeline branch, one where events unfold differently. What if Palpatine, despite losing his inside access to the Council, still managed to execute Order 66? What if his other preparations were sufficient to launch his coup, even without Anakin's corruption? In this scenario, the Chancellor would have had to rely more heavily on his emergency powers and his control over the clone army. The purge of the Jedi would still be devastating, but it would unfold very differently, with Anakin fighting on the side of the light. Picture the moment when the order goes out across the galaxy. Clone Commander Cody receives the transmission while serving alongside Obi-Wan on Utapau. But instead of hunting a single Jedi Master, he and his troops would find themselves facing both Obi-Wan and Anakin, fighting side by side as they had throughout the Clone Wars. The battle would be fierce, but two powerful Jedi Knights working in perfect coordination would be far more than any clone battalion could handle. They would fight their way to a ship and escape, but not before saving other Jedi who might have fallen in the original timeline. On Coruscant, the scene at the Jedi Temple would be dramatically different. Instead of Darth Vader leading the assault, the clone troopers would face the full strength of the Jedi Council. Masters Windu, Yoda, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and others would organize a defense of the temple, evacuating younglings and Padawans while holding off the attackers. Anakin, arriving in the midst of this battle, would become a rallying point for the defenders. His power and skill, channeled through the light side rather than the dark, would inspire the other Jedi to greater heights of courage and effectiveness. The evacuation would be more successful than anyone dared hope. While the temple itself might still fall, hundreds of Jedi who died in the original purge would escape to fight another day. The Jedi Order, instead of being reduced to a handful of survivors, would retain much of its strength and knowledge. The political situation would be more complex in this timeline. Palpatine's coup might still succeed in the short term, with his control over the Senate and the clone army allowing him to declare himself emperor. But without Darth Vader as his enforcer, the surviving Jedi, led by figures like Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin, would immediately begin organizing resistance. Instead of the scattered, desperate rebellion we see in the original trilogy, this would be a coordinated effort by some of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy. Padme's role in this timeline would be crucial. As one of the few senators with both the moral authority and political skill to challenge Palpatine's power grab, she would become a key figure in the emerging rebellion. Her pregnancy, instead of being a source of vulnerability, would become a powerful symbol of the future they were fighting for. The early rebellion would be far more effective than its later counterpart. With Jedi Knights serving as leaders and special operatives, they could accomplish missions that would be impossible for ordinary rebels. Anakin, in particular, would become a legendary figure. The Jedi who stood up to the Emperor, the hero who chose light over darkness when it mattered most. But Palpatine would not give up easily. Recognizing the threat posed by the surviving Jedi, he would dedicate enormous resources to hunting them down. Dark side adepts, inquisitors, and bounty hunters would scour the galaxy, making life dangerous for any Force-sensitive individual. This would create a very different kind of conflict from what we see in the original trilogy. Instead of a technological terror like the Death Star, Palpatine might focus on developing Force-related weapons and techniques. Ancient Sith artifacts, dark side rituals, and forbidden technologies might all be employed in his war against the Jedi. The conflict would be more personal, more focused on the eternal struggle between light and dark, rather than the political and military aspects that dominated the original rebellion. Battles would be fought not just with starships and armies, but with lightsabers and force powers, as Jedi strike teams conducted raids across the galaxy, while Imperial forces tried to run them to ground. Anakin's children, when they were born, would grow up in this very different galaxy. Instead of being hidden away on remote worlds, they might be raised within the Jedi community, trained from birth in the ways of the Force by masters like their father, Obi-Wan and Yoda. Luke and Leia would develop very differently in this timeline. Growing up knowing their heritage, trained in the Force from early childhood, and surrounded by the love and wisdom of the Jedi Order, they would become powerful allies in the fight against the Empire. But they would also face challenges unknown in the original timeline. As the children of the famous Anakin Skywalker, they would be prime targets for Imperial forces. Their training would need to emphasize not just power, but wisdom and restraint, as the dark side would constantly whisper to them about easier paths to victory. This timeline might see the emergence of a new generation of Jedi, trained not in peacetime, but in the crucible of rebellion. These Jedi would be different from their predecessors, more willing to take direct action, more comfortable with warfare, but also more aware of the temptations that such circumstances could present. The eventual victory over the Empire, when it came, would be achieved through very different means. Instead of the destruction of the Death Star serving as the symbolic turning point, it might be a great battle between Jedi and Sith, light and dark, that finally tips the balance. Anakin's confrontation with Palpatine, delayed from the original timeline, would eventually come. But this time, he would face the Emperor not as a corrupted apprentice seeking redemption, but as a mature Jedi Master fighting to free the galaxy from tyranny. The battle would be epic in scope, representing not just a personal conflict, but the culmination of a galactic civil war. Anakin, drawing on decades of experience and the full power of the light side, would face Palpatine at the height of his dark power. But let's explore a third possibility, perhaps the most complex and tragic of all. What if, despite all the advantages of his wiser choice, Anakin still eventually fell to the dark side, but through different circumstances and at a much later time? In this scenario, Anakin's early wisdom in declining the council seat would give him years of stability and growth. He would become a respected Jedi Knight, perhaps even a master, with strong relationships throughout the Order. His marriage to Padme would be happy and stable, and they would raise their children together in peace. But the dark side is patient, and the prophecy of the Chosen One is not easily escaped. Perhaps years later, during a particularly difficult mission or personal crisis, Anakin would finally face temptations too great to resist. Imagine this. It's been 15 years since the Clone Wars ended with Palpatine's defeat. Anakin is now a Jedi Master, highly respected throughout the Order. Luke and Leia are teenagers, showing incredible potential in the Force. Padme has served multiple terms as Queen of Naboo and is now a key figure in the Reformed Republic. But then, a new threat emerges from the unknown regions. Ancient Sith artifacts are discovered, pointing to a dark side presence that predates even Palpatine. As the Jedi investigate, they uncover evidence of a Sith empire that has been growing in secret for centuries, preparing to invade the known galaxy. The war that follows is unlike anything the galaxy has seen. These new Sith are not subtle manipulators, like Palpatine, but conquerors who believe in the raw power of the dark side. They bring with them technologies and techniques that challenge everything the Jedi thought they knew about the Force. In the desperate battles that follow, Anakin witnesses horrors that shake him to his core. Perhaps he sees Obi-Wan killed in battle or watches as entire worlds are corrupted by dark side energy. The weight of being the Chosen One, the burden of having the power to potentially end the conflict but being restricted by Jedi principles, begins to wear on him. The turning point might come when the Sith target his family directly. Despite all precautions, despite the protection of the Jedi Order, Luke or Leia might be captured and tortured. Or perhaps Padme, now in her 50s but still beautiful and vital, is threatened in a way that awakens all of Anakin's old fears about loss. Faced with the potential destruction of everything he loves, this older, wiser Anakin might make the same choice his younger self made in the original timeline, but for different reasons. Not out of selfishness or ambition, but out of love and desperation. "I can end this war," he might tell the Jedi Council. "I know you feel it too. The dark side offers power that we need to defeat these invaders. If I just use it once, just enough to save everyone." The Council's response would be predictable. The dark side is never just used once. Power corrupts. The end doesn't justify the means. But this Anakin would have decades of service and sacrifice behind him. His fall, when it came, would be all the more tragic because it would come from love rather than hate. This version of Darth Vader would be completely different from the one we know. Instead of the bitter, twisted figure consumed by self-loathing, this would be a dark lord driven by protective instincts twisted into possessive obsession. He would genuinely believe he was saving the galaxy, making the hard choices that others were too weak or too principled to make. His relationship with Luke and Leia would be complex beyond anything in the original trilogy. They would remember him as a loving father, which would make his fall even more heartbreaking. Instead of discovering that Vader is their father, they would have to watch their father become Vader. The dynamic between this version of Vader and his children would drive the entire conflict. Luke, trained in the Jedi arts from childhood, would be powerful enough to face his father in combat, but emotionally devastated by the necessity. Leia, perhaps choosing a different path than her brother, might become a political leader, trying to find a diplomatic solution to the crisis. The eventual redemption of this Anakin, if it came at all, would have to be earned through facing the consequences of his choices, not just in terms of galactic destruction, but in terms of the personal relationships he had damaged. The forgiveness of Luke and Leia would be harder won, the path back to the light more difficult, because this Anakin would have had so much more to lose and would have lost it through his own choices. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of all these alternate timelines is how they would affect the broader galaxy's relationship with the Force and with Force users. In the original timeline, the Jedi became myths and legends, their existence doubted by many within a single generation. In a timeline where the Jedi survived and remained active, the Force would remain a known and acknowledged part of galactic life. Force-sensitive children would be found and trained, temples would be maintained and protected, and the ancient knowledge of the Jedi would be preserved and expanded. This would have profound implications for galactic culture and politics. Governments would have to account for Force users in their military and diplomatic calculations. Trade routes might be planned with consideration for Force-sensitive navigators. Entire industries might develop around Force-related technologies and techniques. The diversity of Force traditions would also be more preserved. In the original timeline, the destruction of the Jedi led to the loss of countless variations and interpretations of Force use. But in our alternate timeline, different worlds and cultures might develop their own approaches to the Force, creating a rich tapestry of traditions and techniques. We might see the emergence of Force-using healers who focus entirely on the light side's life-giving properties, or perhaps warrior monks who specialize in using the Force for protection and defense. There could even be scholarly orders dedicated to studying the Force as a natural phenomenon, approaching it with scientific rigor rather than religious reverence. The political implications would be equally significant. A galaxy with active Force users would develop very different power structures. The ability to sense deception, to influence minds, to predict danger. These would all be factors that governments and organizations would have to consider. There might be laws governing the use of Force powers in commercial or political contexts. Ethical debates about the right of Force users to influence others, even for benevolent purposes, would rage in academic and political circles. The question of whether Force users should be held to higher standards of behavior given their greater power would be a constant source of tension. Educational systems would need to be completely different as well. Instead of hiding the existence of the Force or treating it as superstition, schools would need to teach about it as a real and important aspect of galactic life. Children would learn about Force sensitivity the way they learn about any other biological variation, and societies would need to develop ways to identify and nurture Force-sensitive individuals. The technological development of the galaxy might also take different directions. In the original timeline, the Empire focused heavily on military technology and tools of oppression. But in a galaxy where the Jedi remained active, there might be more focus on technologies that complemented rather than replaced Force abilities. We might see the development of sophisticated meditation aids, devices that could amplify Force healing abilities or communication systems that worked in harmony with Force-based telepathy. The symbiosis between technology and the Force that we see hinted at in lightsaber construction might be expanded to cover entire fields of engineering and medicine. The economic implications would be staggering as well. Force-enhanced agriculture could make formerly barren worlds fertile. Force-guided mining operations could locate resources with unprecedented efficiency. Force-sensitive craftspeople could create works of art and technology that would be impossible through conventional means, but with these opportunities would also come challenges. The temptation to exploit Force users for economic gain would be enormous. Slavery and trafficking of Force-sensitive individuals might become major galactic problems. The inequality between Force users and non-Force users could become a source of social tension and conflict. Religious and philosophical movements would also evolve differently. Instead of the Force becoming a half-remembered legend, it would remain a central part of galactic spiritual life. Different cultures would develop different interpretations of what the Force means and how it should be approached. Some might see Force users as blessed individuals chosen by cosmic forces for special purposes. Others might view Force sensitivity as simply another natural talent, no more significant than artistic or athletic ability. Still others might fear Force users as potentially dangerous individuals who need to be carefully controlled and monitored. The relationship between the Jedi Order and these various cultural perspectives would be complex and sometimes problematic. The Jedi would need to navigate between their role as guardians of peace and justice and their respect for cultural diversity and self-determination. In some cases, this might lead to the development of multiple Force-using orders, each with their own interpretation of proper behavior and technique. We might see Jedi focusing on knowledge and wisdom, warrior orders emphasizing combat and protection, healer orders dedicated to medicine and recovery, and artisan orders exploring the creative applications of Force sensitivity. The diversity of approaches to the Force might also lead to new discoveries and techniques. Cross-pollination between different traditions could result in innovations that no single group would have developed on their own. The rigid orthodoxy that sometimes characterized the Jedi Order in the prequel era might give way to a more flexible and adaptive approach to Force training and philosophy. But perhaps most importantly, the survival of multiple Force traditions would help prevent the kind of stagnation and disconnection from galactic reality that contributed to the Jedi Order's downfall in the original timeline. By remaining engaged with diverse communities and perspectives, Force users would be less likely to become isolated from the people they were meant to serve. The question of how to train new generations of Force users would become a major area of experimentation and development. The traditional Jedi approach of taking children from their families at a young age might be challenged by cultures that prefer to keep families together or that have different ideas about child rearing and education. Some societies might develop community-based training programs where Force-sensitive children remain with their families while receiving specialized instruction. Others might create boarding schools that provide intensive Force training while still maintaining family connections. Still others might prefer apprenticeship programs that pair young Force users with experienced mentors in more personal, one-on-one relationships. These different approaches to training would likely produce Force users with very different strengths, weaknesses, and perspectives. A child trained in the traditional Jedi manner might excel at emotional control and philosophical wisdom, but struggle with practical problem-solving. A community-trained Force user might be more grounded and socially connected, but less disciplined in their use of power. The diversity of training approaches might also help address one of the major criticisms of the traditional Jedi Order: its tendency to suppress emotions rather than helping individuals learn to manage them in healthy ways. Alternative training programs might emphasize emotional intelligence, psychological health, and personal fulfillment alongside Force development. This could lead to Force users who are more psychologically balanced, more emotionally mature, and less susceptible to the kind of dramatic falls to the dark side that characterized figures like Anakin in the original timeline. By acknowledging and addressing human needs for connection, love, and personal fulfillment, these new training approaches might produce more stable and effective Force users. The technological applications of the Force would also expand dramatically in a galaxy where Force users remained active and numerous. We've already seen hints of this in canonical materials. Lightsabers that are impossible to create without Force sensitivity, hyperspace navigation that is enhanced by Force abilities, and healing techniques that seem to blend technology with Force powers. In our alternate timeline, these applications might be developed much more extensively. Medical technology that incorporates Force healing could revolutionize healthcare across the galaxy. Agricultural techniques that use Force-enhanced plant growth could solve food scarcity on countless worlds. Manufacturing processes that incorporate Force abilities could create materials and products with properties that seem almost magical. Transportation systems might develop that rely on Force-enhanced navigation and piloting. Communication networks might incorporate Force-based telepathy to create instantaneous, untappable connections across galactic distances. Art forms might emerge that blend traditional techniques with Force abilities to create experiences that are impossible through conventional means, but these developments would also raise ethical and practical questions. Should Force-enhanced medical treatment be available to everyone, or only to those who can afford it? How do you regulate industries that rely on abilities that most people don't possess? What happens to traditional craftspeople and artists when Force users can create superior products with less effort? The integration of Force abilities into galactic society would require careful thought and planning to ensure that the benefits are shared fairly and that non-Force users aren't unfairly disadvantaged. This might lead to the development of new political and economic systems designed to account for the unique capabilities of Force-sensitive individuals. In some cases, this might mean creating separate but parallel systems, one for Force users and one for everyone else. In other cases, it might mean developing ways to artificially enhance or supplement natural human abilities so that non-Force users can compete more fairly. Still, other approaches might focus on identifying unique roles and specializations for different types of individuals. The military implications would be particularly significant. In the original timeline, the Empire developed technologies like the Death Star partly as a way to project power without relying on Force users. But in a galaxy where multiple Force-using organizations exist, military strategy would need to account for abilities like precognition, telekinesis, and mind influence. This might lead to the development of very different military doctrines and technologies. Stealth and surprise attacks. The implications for law enforcement and justice systems would be profound. How do you investigate crimes when some individuals can influence minds or sense guilt and innocence directly? How do you conduct trials when witnesses and evidence can be manipulated in ways that are difficult to detect or prevent? Some societies might develop justice systems that specifically incorporate Force abilities. Judges with empathetic powers might be better able to assess the truthfulness of testimony. Investigators with precognitive abilities might be more effective at solving crimes. Rehabilitation programs might use force healing techniques to address psychological issues that contribute to criminal behavior, but these same abilities could also be abused in terrifying ways. Authoritarian governments might use force users as thought police, detecting dissent before it can be acted upon. Corrupt officials might use mind influence to escape justice or to manipulate legal proceedings. The very concept of mental privacy might become obsolete in societies where powerful force users are integrated into government institutions. The development of legal frameworks that protect individual rights while still allowing for the beneficial use of force abilities would become a major challenge for galactic civilization. Different societies might take very different approaches, leading to a patchwork of laws and regulations that could create conflicts between different jurisdictions. In our exploration of how Anakin's single decision might reshape the galaxy, we've seen that even the smallest choices can have profound and far-reaching consequences. The decision to decline a council seat, motivated by humility and wisdom rather than ambition and resentment, would set in motion changes that would ripple across generations. The psychological impact on Anakin himself would be the starting point, but the effects would spread to every relationship in his life, every political situation he touched, and ultimately to the entire structure of galactic civilization. Palpatine's plans would be disrupted, the Jedi Order might survive, and the balance between light and dark would be maintained through wisdom rather than restored through sacrifice. We've explored multiple possible timelines, ones where Anakin discovers Palpatine's identity early and helps defeat him before Order 66. Ones where the Purge still happens, but Anakin fights alongside the other Jedi to preserve the Order. And ones where Anakin still eventually falls, but as a mature adult, making desperate choices rather than a confused young man being manipulated. Each of these timelines shows us something different about the nature of choice, the power of wisdom, and the ways that individual decisions can shape the fate of entire civilizations. They remind us that heroism isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's about having the wisdom to step back, to choose humility over pride, to trust in something greater than your own ambitions. The galaxy that might have emerged from Anakin's wiser choice would be more diverse, more complex, and in many ways more hopeful than the one we know from the original trilogy. It would be a galaxy where the Force remained a known and acknowledged part of life, where different cultures could develop their own approaches to using and understanding these mysterious powers, and where the ancient conflict between light and dark could be balanced rather than cyclical. But it would also be a galaxy with its own challenges and dangers. The integration of Force abilities into everyday life would create new forms of inequality and new opportunities for abuse. The diversity of Force traditions might lead to conflicts between different philosophical approaches. The power that Force users possess would require constant vigilance to ensure it was used responsibly. In the end, this exploration reminds us that the Star Wars saga is ultimately about choice. The choices we make in moments of crisis, the values we hold on to when everything seems lost, and the wisdom to know when stepping back might be more heroic than stepping forward. Anakin Skywalker's tragedy was not that he was destined to fall to the dark side, but that he made choices that led him there, step by step. By imagining a different choice at a crucial moment, we can see how different the galaxy might have been. Not perfect, no galaxy could ever be perfect, but perhaps more balanced, more hopeful, and more true to the ideals that the Jedi Order was meant to represent. Sometimes the greatest act of power is knowing when not to use it, and sometimes the most profound wisdom is found in the simple word, no, spoken at exactly the right moment. The ripple effects of that single moment of humility would continue to spread across the galaxy for generations, touching the lives of countless beings and shaping the development of entire civilizations. It's a reminder that in our own lives, the choices we make, even ones that seem small and insignificant, can have consequences we never imagined. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that wisdom, humility, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult, are the forces that truly shape the universe. The force may flow through all things, but it's the choices of individuals that determine whether that flow brings light or darkness to the galaxy.